Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things cube but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and tonight I'm joined by my other host,
May Magic, also known as the troublemaker of Twitter.
the troublemaker of Twitter. That is, yeah. And I may get that moniker as well today. I've been blowing up Twitter like nobody's business. I promise to cease and desist that action starting tomorrow. But so we have an interesting episode for you today on house rules. But before we go any further down that rabbit hole, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube. We're going to have our libations of the show. May, what are you having this evening?
I'm having a Wilson's Orchard and Farm dry hard apple cider.
That actually sounds amazing. Kind of want that instead of this. And I am going to be having this evening a Terrapin Luau Pog IPA, passion fruit, orange, guava. It's got a lot of stuff going on with this thing. Let's go ahead and crack them open, and let's get to the show. Well, that one almost exploded on the mic. I don't know if that was a good. All right, so
that nice crisp clink.
So our episode today is house rules, we said. So I put a question out to the interweb, and it went as such. I put it on Twitter, and I put it on Facebook, etc., and the Discords. Question for the community: what are your cube's rules? Example: no hexproof or protections. Theme, i.e. enchantments only. No rares, i.e. uncommon, common, only certain creature types, in theme, etc. The rules for inclusion or exclusion you make. But this was a question that I put out there, and man, oh man, did we get some interesting responses. But before we even go into the responses, May, would you mind taking on Morrow's axiom so we can kind of talk about what's the whole point of this conversation, right?
The whole point of our conversation, my dear Anthony, is that we're talking about how restriction breeds creativity. But we also want to talk about the inverse axis of when does restriction only just start breeding restriction.
Correct. When are you painting yourself into a corner by making house rules, as we say? So, for example, a cube curator is, by proxy, a game designer. And we design game elements and rules just like any game you'd go buy from any big box store, etc., where the game designer has made borders, if you will, around the entire game so that you as the player can move within the borders of the walls of the games, but you can manipulate story elements or game pieces within the game. So for us as the creator, as the curator, we have our own set of rules outside of, say, the best way to explain this is think of it like firmware versus software. As the curator is the firmware portion, we're actually doing the complete design build of the environment, but then the user is using the software within the game, and we've made rules within the dimensions of the game that they're allowed to follow. Think of instructional sheet versus we're actually doing the hard coding of the game elements and what you're allowed. So it's kind of the behind the scenes as a curator is what we're going to talk about today. It's not the crowdsourcing of, hey, play group, what would you like for me to design? May, do you have any thoughts on that idea?
While I like your comparison, I actually think of it's more like when you have a game of Monopoly sitting in your closet for a while, and then when you finally bring it out, nobody remembers what the actual rules are because you all just play the version that you're used to.
Right. You start.
And while the pieces are right. You're creating house rules to tailor your experiences because, let's face it, when it comes to playing Monopoly, nobody likes playing just actual Monopoly.
True, except for me with my Monopoly.
Unlike Monopoly, though, we have Magic the Gathering, which is just so fundamentally good, well-designed and fun, that when we reuse those pieces to create those rules and create those restrictions for our limited sets, then it can create lots of opportunities for interesting gameplay, interesting drafts.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of the behind the curtains, the aha moments of a content creator. When we're coming up with ideas, it sometimes can be the day before we actually write an episode. So every episode is very deliberate, right? These just didn't come out of left field. So in this case, this was actually a conversation that I had with our good friend Nathan Black on the show, who's appeared in multiple episodes. And he has generated or built a almost Legends cube that we'll talk about in a future episode. But the gist of the cube is that all the components within said cube have to be legendary of some sort, which is a really cool design restriction, right, May? I mean, it's awesome.
I really like it because it's simple, it's clean, and I'm just a big fan of things that you can explain with one sentence, because
Correct.
Short attention span.
And it is Nathan's first stab at building a cube. And he listened to our cube cloning episode. I'm just kind of giving a little bit of context to this. He thought, hey, I can do that. So he went out and he found a really cool cube. And it had the design elements that we talked about. Everything must be legendary. But then we're going to throw Anthony into the mix. A cog is happening. We've got this brand new Lord of the Rings set coming out, right? And now we're doing the thing that all the curators and the drafters and players and everybody does is we're going through spoiler season. We're like, oh man, this is awesome. This is awesome. Well, as I said, Nathan's got a brand new almost legendary or almost legends cube, right? This new card came out. And I'm going to read it to you now. It's Delighted Halfling. And for 1 forest, you get a creature halfling citizen. Tap, add colorless mana to your pool, or tap, add 1 mana of any color, spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell, and that spell can't be countered for a 1/2. So I get on our little text chain. I'm like, oh my gosh, Nathan, this is absolutely perfect for your cube, your almost legends cube. His response was, it's not legendary. I was like, what? Yeah, it's May giggles. But you see, this is where this is where these episodes come to life, right? And we love our good friend Nathan at the show, but this is an excellent example of back to what we're talking about with Morrow's axiom, where restriction breeds creativity. But if you take the inverse of that, restriction breeds further restriction. Like, at what point are you making the design rails for yourself as a curator so strict that you will not allow cards to enter or permeate into your environment because you feel like you're breaking the central theme, right? So I'm going to ask, I want to ask a general question of May, because I have an opinion about this. This is just out of curveball, as you might call it, right, May? Is if you had a thematic cube, what percentage of that thematic cube in your mind needs to be strict to the idea in order to express the story, if you had to pick a number?
Well, considering that the fake cube, I would say, does have a lot of these hard restrictions based off of themes, based off of value, based off of rarity, all these miscellaneous things that I have in the fake cube, just as an example. In that specific example, I would say around 85-90%
awesome
is going to be within my rules.
That's my number too. I mean, that's my number. That 10% for me, or that 15%, I will allow things like, I don't know, we'll just say counterspell or some kind of cube staple right, to enter the field, because it actually serves the cube not to be so restrictive. So when I approach Nathan about this, you understand it can be daunting. I like to use that word more than I should, but as a new curator wants to follow the rules or the path of the cube that he had cloned, I understand his point of view. But you can also see, I want to reiterate, Delighted Halfling. You can basically tap it, add 1 colorless mana, but you can also tap it, add 1 mana of any color, spend this mana to cast a legendary spell that can't be countered, right? So that is, in its idea, is super healthy for a legendary cube. But his restriction is, it's not a legendary halfling citizen named whatever.
I respect his dedication towards the restriction of the cube and really trying to cement what that cube is supposed to represent and having that as a clear line. I'm not going to say that he is wrong in that decision.
Correct.
And we're definitely not here to, call him out of, oh, well, how dare you not do the things that we're wanting to do.
He knows this episode is coming.
Yeah.
I told him.
Yeah, just putting that out there for the listeners. That way, it's very clear.
It's more of, this was a conversation amongst friends, right? And we talked about this, and I was trying to understand. I was trying to get him to understand my side. Like, this should be in your 15% rule, and his was, it has to be in my 100% rule. And then he does have these other interesting rule sets he's making, where he'll allow one to rotate in and one to rotate out because he's improving that environment. But I thought this was such an interesting idea of asking, then springing forward with this, what does the community? What does the community do with these ideas? What are the restrictions that the community has outside of that? Going back to that original question that I had posed in the beginning of the episode was, what are your cube rules? Hexproof protections, themes, enchantments, no rares, all the things, right? What are your rules for inclusion or exclusion that you make? Just trying to get an idea if we could actually compile in so many words, right? Make a living history of the interesting cube rules and restrictions that people put on themselves. And what are the ones you follow? Right. May, I've got a couple of them. I'll run down mine real quick before we go any further. Mine will be the horror cube. Has to be scary. I recently broke with my lands and allowed my lands to be places that you wouldn't want to walk after dark, or they'd be scary or take a dip in, right? So I had to do some weird, like
Mm-hmm.
artsy, but I allowed myself to mentally break out of that. My femme fatale has to be, 85, 90% of it has to be female, with
Mm-hmm.
exceptions of mana rocks or whatever. So I make my own restrictions, and it makes this interesting curating, but it also makes it so that you don't have access to cards that you would want, right? I mean, May, you've experienced that.
Right.
We go back and forth, you and I, all the time. I'm like, hey, have you seen this really cool like swan that come out? And you're like, nope, cost $3.
Yep. There have been several times where I have a budget restriction on the Fake Cube, and you send me this really cool card that's within the theme. It does something really cool. It would be great in the Fake Cube, but I don't do it because people clone my Fake Cube. I literally had somebody clone it today, and I want people to be able to clone it, have a paper version of it, and it remain a budget option for people.
Yeah, and I
And
can get that.
having to keep that in mind constantly, I've
$2.
had to
It
introduce
has to
that
be
as a
rare.
restriction for myself.
Yeah, I mean, so at what point are we actually painting ourselves in the corner, or we're doing the inverse of Maro's axiom? And we're just going to kind of
Right.
talk about that. So when we reached out,
Like, I actually have a specific example
Go ahead.
where I used to have a Turbofog option to draft into the Fake Cube. And during this time when Turbofog just existed, one of the key cards for that was Tangle. And Tangle's a fantastic card. And when it was around $2-3 a card, I was like, yeah, okay, it's a little high, but I can handle that. And then it jumped up to $9 a card, and I had to cut it. And then slowly after that card left, all the other Turbofog cards left.
Yep.
And now there are no Turbofog cards in my cube.
That's unfortunate. I really liked it too. I remember when you were talking about it, that was pretty cool. But the rules are the house rules, and this wasn't something that Anthony came up.
Yep.
This is straight out of Willy Wonka. It's house rules. So some of the common designer curation restrictions that we came across, and we're going to go over some very specific examples, but the ones I thought were most prevalent were no dual face modal cards. I mean, people just really are not, for whatever, for various personal reasons, a lot of people don't like to take cards out of sleeves and flip them over. And I can totally respect that. My horror cube, my sleeves are going to get beat to death when we go to CubeCon. I mean, they won't look good when I come home because most of those are double face modal cards. But that was like one of the most prevalent ones, actually. Another one that really, and this one makes sense to me. I mean, I recently, no protections, right? No color protections, no artifact protections, nothing that stops creatures.
I'll also staple on, hexproof and shroud because, not being able to interact with your opponent's cards is innately unfun for a limited experience.
I just cut, actually, this past week, Lightning Greaves out of my artifact cube for this reason, because I do like Lightning Greaves, and I just kind of had stopped even noticing it was there after a while because it's in a lot of my cubes. But what I didn't like about that environment is when you put a lot of equipment on a creature and then you just make like this giant, you can't deal with it, Gaiju, and you can't kill it. So it just it stacks too high, and then you can't interact with it, and it has haste, and it's too easy of a win con, right? So I kind of took that away. Another one that was actually quite prevalent was no planeswalkers, and myself included with that idea. I've got a lot of cubes, my thematic builds, where I avoid planeswalkers.
There are no planeswalkers in the Fake Cube.
I run planeswalkers in my femme fatale, and specifically for that reason. And then I also, because female, Chandras and whatnot, Nissas, but also in my horror cube, I run like Lilianas and those types. Tybalt never quite made it, the original OG Tybalt. Someday.
Gee, I wonder why.
I don't know. You know how many times, true story, actually, my friends had to talk me out of, like, they had to pull me off that ledge so many times. I'm like, come on, man. Actually, it'll be pretty sweet. You only got to discard a card at random. And they're like, no, that's a terrible card. These only cost $2. No. But that was kind of prevalent, was no planeswalkers. And I can understand that because sometimes they want the gameplay to be more battlefield or more player interaction and not have that fog or the active fog that we've talked about oftentimes. At least that's my opinion of planeswalkers. I love them, but they're just not suited for all environments. And here's a big one, actually. May, would you mind picking up that next one?
Sure. Must be able to read the cards. So it means things like no foreign languages, spellings, full arts. Card legibility is very, very important. I have a similar restriction in my Fake Cube of any specialized mechanics have to have reminder text.
Yeah. One thing I'm concerned about in that perfect example of it's for CubeCon is I've got these full art. I've got a full art Damnation, a full art Day of Judgment, and a full art Wrath of God. And they're really beautiful. And that art is just, all of them are frightening. They fit that theme. And I think those are pretty standard cards, but the only thing would be like can't be regenerated, I guess. But that's not really a situation that runs in that
Mm,
cube. But I can imagine though if we get those 3 cards passed around the table, I think Lightning Bolt's also full art. I'm hoping that we don't get a new
mm,
player. I'm hoping a judge will help and people don't pass up something really great like Damnation. That may be a problem that I'm created, but I love that art, and that's kind of my art restriction that may breed
mm,
restriction to a player in somebody work.
mm.
Yeah. And then we have our most common one. May, would you mind taking that one, please?
Rarity restrictions. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
It's things like peasant cubes, things like pauper cubes, all bulk rare cubes. I don't have the link on hand, but I've seen a few and they're
I got
pretty
a
cool.
dumpster fire bulk rare cube. I can send it to you. We have to play that at CubeCon.
There you go.
You need to set aside about 2.5, 3 hours per individual match. but yeah, we did, like I said, rarity restrictions. So we did gold. We had to be gold or mythic above, right? And then we also had, rare. And then we also had to have like a $2 count on it. So we've created our own restrictions, but it was a fun exercise. And that is part of what the positive side of restriction creates, is that your cube environments will in fact have different thumbprints or identities. So none of them will look the same. They won't look homogenous or washed out amongst themselves, right? It gives them properties where you go into an artifact world, you go into a horror world, or you go into a magical phase and whimsical storybooks. And every one of them don't look the same. So that's where restriction does the positive side. But also restriction, as we said in the beginning, can also make it as a new curator doesn't want to overstep and break their rules by adding a cube staple, we'll say like preordained or something like that, because it doesn't fit their genre. So they may be sacrificing some very important game elements that should be included in their game environment because it will make it healthier, but they're being so tightly or so strict with their rules. May, do you have any thoughts about that?
I tend to agree with you. I do think that there is definitely room to stay within your lane and very firmly put your foot down and say, nope, this is the rule, I'm not changing it. And there are times when I think that is good, but sometimes I think that your health for the format and your environment and getting people to play your cube is more important than your personal rules sometimes, and it's easy to forget that as somebody who's passionate about their environment.
That is 100% well said. And I've actually, that's funny you should say that, because I think I had someone, maybe my good friend Chris, as I said, he's my, we'll call him going forward my cube coach, right? He's the person that has to, I'll say, hey, I got a great idea. And he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. But like, I think he had that talk with me a while back. Like, you have to think about, like, the cube is not just for you. It's an expression of your art, your personality, and you're putting it out there.
Mm-hmm.
But people also have to want to sit down and play it, right? So you may have to choose to make some concessions on your restrictions to make the environment playable. And that's the weird balancing act that we're not going to solve during this episode. We're just kind of highlighting the most common ones. I want to give one more example,
because it's not an issue that can be solved. It's up to the curator and the pod.
and I think that really comes back to something you and I talked about a long time ago, is about how to analyze and understand feedback. Right? If you're gonna do a cube based on restriction, then maybe your restriction is your expression, but your pod, if they're displeased with it or whatever, you may not get the play reps that you were expecting. That's where the open lines of communication and the feedback and the open channels, where I get this every time. Like, Stu will sit down and goes, why are you running this card? He'll be very brutally honest with me, but it's intended to be like he's doing challenge questions to make me present an argument. It's very back and forthy. We volley our arguments, and then we kind of come to a conclusion. It's never a one-sided thing. But he'll challenge a couple of my choices, like, why are you running this card? This seems this is a very low powered for a high powered environment, etc. Another example where Morrow's axiom, restriction breeds creativity, gets turned on its head, back to what we said, when you inverse it and restriction breeds restriction, would be our good friend Christian, who we love on the show. We're all learning here to be curators together. Nobody's good at it out the gate. We're all talking and learning and getting better. But his first iteration of his Bant Enchantments cube, his restriction that he put upon himself, and he was very stern about this, is all creatures have to be enchantments. Well, that really restricted him, or painted him in a corner, in so many words, where his critters had to come from either Kamigawa or Theros in some form, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was Neon Dynasty, where you started getting this weird blend, mostly Theros, where they had what's that effect that they bestow, when they had bestow or something like that. Well, a lot of those creatures, I mean, to put it straight, and they still exist, didn't take too long to figure it out. A lot of them are really clunky. I mean, they cost a lot of mana. The game was slowed down. It was very topple-oriented, stack high, whoever gets the biggest creature. Now that cube is an absolutely beautiful spot because, through play reps and us talking about it, and him loosening the reins on those restrictions, that he'll actually put new creatures in there that aren't enchantment exclusive, right? And now he thinks about putting auras on top of creatures. It's a whole different way of mindset, but when he first came out the gate, he does what we all do. This will only be vampires. This will be only werewolves. This will only be fae. This will only be enchantments. And we tightened the belt so tight that maybe, as May mentioned previously, that we weren't considering that the play experience didn't translate to your players as well as it did in your mind. May, do you have any thoughts on that?
Right. I didn't get a chance to play the Bant Enchantment Cube yet.
You will.
But
CubeCon 2023.
I will.
Yep.
Yep, see you there. But what I can gather from when I've looked at the list before and, just general impressions of it, like you said, Bestow is just kind of clunky. And I like Bestow. I love Bestow. But the other problem is that when you have such a tight restriction, that all the deck creativity becomes the same. All the deck and all the metagame becomes the same. Like you said, it's very topple-oriented, of who can stack their creature and who can stick their creature, rather than a little bit more flexibility in what people are doing with those enchantments. And having that reign loosened up a bit so that we could have more interesting interactions with those enchantments can create more interesting metagames. It can create a more interesting environment, and thus creates a more interesting and engaging environment for your players to play.
Yes, so sometimes...
And that's the most important thing.
I agree. Sometimes the restriction actually makes linear gameplay unintentionally, right? Back to we're going to move on soon here to our talking about what the community feedback was, but in my original iteration of my horror cube, it basically had to be the monster mash or it wasn't going to go in there. And I was so restrictive in that design that it wasn't really fun, to be honest with you. And through iteration and process, as you do as a cube creator, it gets better and better. But you have to actually take that feedback from your friend circle and realize that maybe the cube is not just for you, it's for your community as well. And it's a different way of thinking. So restriction can breed restriction if you're too harsh on yourself. I want to move over to our next segment, if you don't mind, May. I want to talk about, so as we said before, we put out that community call. What was your restrictions? What were your rules? What was your expectations? What was your decision making on whether or not something was included or excluded? And I got some really, really, really interesting responses. And I'm going to take the first one. I think what May and I'll do is we'll kind of volley back and forth, right? So I'm going to kind of
nice little volleyball.
Yeah, let's do a little volleyball. So I'll take the first one because these are fascinating, actually. And I think it's a neat exercise. So the first one was from New American Public Art from Twitter. Their rules, and I have yet to see this cube, and I'm super excited, hopefully I get to see it someday, is old border only. No hand disruption. No land destruction. No factional, they said tribal rails, but we're going to go with factional rails. You get the idea. No phasing. It's odd, no phasing, right? Storm. No banding. That's, I guess, actually, when they're doing old border, I can see why they're doing this. No gold cards at all. No tutors. No searching your library for anything. No life gain. Free infinite mulligan. Roll your dice. This one's fun. This is my favorite one. Roll your dice into each other to see who goes first. I think they got that from LPR. I don't know, but this gave me the chuckles. Look at that list. Oh my god, it's like I wonder. So New American Public Art. If you listen to this show, and I hope you do, I gotta know where you pulling my strings with this. But this is amazing. I absolutely love these restrictions.
Yeah, I really like it.
That was fantastic.
And add like a nice little pin for the no phasing. I think that phasing is just an innately clunky mechanic for a lot of places, and it makes sense to be like, all right, I know this is old border only. There are a lot of cards that mention phasing, so we're just gonna not. And I think that's great.
I think it's glorious. Banding's my favorite. Like, get that crap out of here. So as we call people's names out, I truly apologize if we butcher your names. I am sorry. We'll do that in your Twitter handle, but I'm going to do my best. Would you mind taking on this next one? Because I don't want to mess it up.
Jacob Zhao, at _fish_Jacob. In paper, we currently play style bear cube, meaning no counters,
Bar
no
cube,
+1s.
Bar cube, not bear cube. Completely different cube. My cube.
But sorry,
we're going to leave that.
I already
That's
messed it
fantastic.
up.
You made a bear cube. We need to make a bear cube, people. It's fantastic.
It's interesting because it actually has the same rules as my travel cube of absolutely no counters, no +1s, no poison counters, no battles, no sagas. no tokens, but this one's interesting. No sleeves,
Cringe,
and therefore
but I
no
get it.
double-faced cards because there's no sleeves.
No sleeves. I get it, but it hurts my heart. It really does, but I get it. And additionally, it's a desert cube, so no land box.
And it's a desert cube.
Oh my god, this is fantastic! Like literally, that is a pack and play. I love that so much. Actually, that's kind of like
it is the perfect travel cube rule set of no other external pieces needed. It almost makes me want to turn my travel cube into just a desert cube.
Yeah, well, so my Monopoly cube is a desert cube, but I have to do tokens because I don't know what I'm doing with the desert cube. So I had to have treasures to supplement my total curation and adequacies because I was so uncertain that players could play my cube. The next one I'll take. That was great, though. I enjoyed that one. The next one is Dan Schneider at Work Life Value on Twitter. Different rules for different cubes, right? But this one's interesting. Here's one of the favorites. I love this cube. The Devoid cube, everything is colorless. You can only add waste freely to the decks. And I want to talk about his waste. His waste, I think he was joking about it on Twitter. He has like the highest percentage of these absolutely stunning wastes that, oh my God, they're gorgeous. And I'm looking forward to actually playing this cube at CubeCon again. But oh my gosh.
Oh, me too.
I didn't get to play it last year. I had a lot going on in my personal life, but this year, I am 100% checking that box. Dan, if you're listening, I'm going to play your cube. The next one he has...
Me too.
This one went up was the Evergreen Cube. And this one is interesting. It's modern, legal, peasant plus, no non-evergreen mechanics. I like that. I like that stuff. Like when he says evergreen, he's like haste and...
I'm a big fan of the evergreen restriction. Huge fan of that. Because it's easy for players who aren't disenfranchised to just pick up and play and be like, hey, this is the evergreen mechanic. We're going to see this all throughout Magic. We only need to explain it once, and that's it.
And here's my next favorite.
Big fan of that.
He put, and I'm gonna edit for our show's purposes, but it will be in the show notes, is not sure if these were what you're after. I guess no dungeons or initiative, because F that.
And it's funny that he mentioned this.
Oh my God, I was reading
I had
these.
to take Dungeons Initiative out of my cubes just because people didn't want to play it.
Oh my God, I was
So I understand how you feel, Dan.
I was chuckling while reading these. May, would you mind taking this next one by Bonehead at Home, please?
The next one is no PWs?
Planeswalkers.
Planeswalkers, thank you. No Planeswalkers, no DFCs. What is DFCs?
Oh, double face cards.
Double face cards,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Double side modal cards, double face cards. Everybody's making up all these kind
You
of...
had to give me all the ones that are just shortened.
Yeah.
Man, I think I need you to explain lifelink.
Yeah. You should watch our J-Bro episode, Bonehead. I get it. People have...
The point is that no Planeswalkers, no double face cards, no lifelink. Very simple, very clean. It's a very specific environment. This one's from JFK 420, Bonehead at Home.
Well, since you got a short one,
So,
would you mind taking on this next
It's going to
one?
be interesting. Francesco Nier.
We're going to go with that, yep.
We're trying our best. Appreciate the effort,
We're trying.
not the results.
Yep. We tried.
So, they have two cubes. One they're in the middle of deproxying, and the other one they will proxy when they're done. The first one's Artisan, so only commons and uncommons.
This is prevalent.
The second one is Pioneer Plus, so only cards legal in Pioneer, banned in Pioneer, or some form of Pioneer commander sets like Ikoria Commander, Neon Dynasty Commander, SNC Commander, etc. And that one's kind of an interesting.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Pioneer as a format. It's like a modern but more fast forwarded up in time. I just don't keep up with that, to be honest with you. But it's a different time span of cards, right? So that's kind of interesting.
It's
I
like
that.
Modern 2.
Yeah, that's a really
Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah, that's a really neat restriction in my opinion. The next one is from Mendicant. He's actually in our Discord. We talked about this. In the first cube that I built, I don't really have caps on power level, but I do tend to avoid cards that have memory issues. Like Narset. Nope. People are always forgetting that they weren't supposed to draw that card. No 3 fairy for some reasons. So basically, he doesn't want to run cards that are, I guess, mentally tasking. And that's an interesting thing.
I actually really like that restriction.
Yeah, that's actually a fair rule, right?
I was just going to say that I feel like that it is something that a lot of curators, including myself, kind of tend to forget that accessibility is important. And having a bunch of complicated game pieces and things that are too complex for your pod to keep up with can make an accessibility issue for some of your players. And you can accidentally push people out of your play space when you throw in some of these cards that to you might be fine, but to somebody with memory issues like me, for example, it can be a lot more inviting because it can make the play experience just a little bit easier for everybody involved, and I think that's great.
Helps the time frame too in the draft, because if you don't have a lot of, a lot of
Mhm.
excruciating text, right? People can kind of move around,
Mhm.
snap, pick what they want, feels comfortable, and they don't have to sit around and try to, see between the lines or try to understand some foreign language that they don't know while playing Magic the Gathering. I just think it makes the cube more inviting. I like that one, actually. It's pretty good. Kind of it lines up with the evergreen concept in so many words, right? Where you're making the cards visually or aesthetically, pleasing while being passed around, so that players aren't thrown off trying to spend time like reading all the subtext and flavor text before they pass the card because they're uncertain, or they just say, whatever, I don't want to pass. I don't even want to deal with that. The next one we have is by Phil Stanton. My aesthetic rule is basically anything but the new 8th edition frame. I guess he's saying, yep, he's very frame oriented in some way. Everything must be altered, miscut. That's actually pretty cool. Old art frame, and this is basically the result, and he's showing some pictures or whatever. But that's, or he gave me an image of his cube, but that's pretty cool. Is like, he has to have like visual, he wants artistic expression to do it, right? I think that's really
Which
cool.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Like, I always wanted to play just like a showcase cube where it's just all of the showcase cards, or some like variants of those cards, or like promos with like alternate arts. I think that would be a really cool cube to play, but obviously it's not something that I've seen yet.
Well,
so.
there's one coming to CubeCon, if I understand. I think it's all the yellow food.
See you there.
Full altar. Yeah. And I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah. As a matter of
Hopefully
fact,
I get to play it.
As a tangent to that conversation, so when I first started doing my 540 powered cube, which doesn't have real power in it, but everything else is real, I was kind of wanting to make my flavor is all the real cool, like, alternate art promos and all that. I thought it'd make it snap. And you know what? With the mass printings of cards now, where they make 4 different editions of all the cards, it has devalued that expression in so many words. I just don't get the joy that I used to with, like, putting some sweet art in my powered vintage cube, because it was different, because it doesn't feel different at all, right? Like, I've got 9 copies of Thalia, of Thraben, whatever. You get the idea, right? It's just too much.
Right.
It kind of ruined that. It used to be special for me personally, and now I feel like Christmas is over a little bit. Do you feel that way, May? You talk about the overprintings of cards and too much. Christmas used to be great.
I actually have something like extremely adjacent that I've been having a problem with a lot of recent sets. Is there are a lot of cards within the same set that have the same character name, but then like 4 different versions of the card.
Exactly.
And I feel like that could be a really reasonable rule for a lot of people to be like, oh, I played, say, Frodo, and now I have to ask, okay, which Frodo?
It's
if you have your cube environment, then it's easier to be like, this is the only Frodo in the cube. That's it.
Yeah, even having, like, another thing that I try to do, and I've gotten kind of bad at it, is I try to keep reminder text in my cubes. When I can, because I have to consider the fact that it won't always be the same people I'm playing with. So you pass around a card, and they don't know what this effect does, and they have to try to ask. It kind of ruins the draft in so many words. It kills the secrecy of the draft while we're going around. So I think it's a good idea to have cards in there have reminder text. Although a lot of the full arts don't nowadays, and it's just a restriction that I'm kind of starting to latch onto a little bit. It kind of falls in the evergreen concept. Making the cards a little easier to read is sometimes better for the draft. And
it's a restriction that adds accessibility and makes a better play experience, and therefore it kind of breeds creativity.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that with 100%. We're going to go over our next good friend, Stephen Conefall. He's got a lot here, but we'll try to get some gist out of it. So if you don't know Stephen, you will, and he loves Mirage. So everything's Mirage. He's asking. He loves putting Mirage printings, visions, weatherlight. It's kind of his jam. But he's got a lot of different cubes that he likes to express himself in. But what he said during his thing was he really does believe in Morrow's axiom that limitations breed creativity. And one of the things I dislike about Vintage Cube is what he says, is every iteration is essentially really good cards plus some new cards from the past year. I'm curious what you guys want to discuss on this topic. But the gist of it is that he likes set restrictions. He's really gotten to know Steven a little bit more. He's especially into Mirage. He loves that set. He likes the art across that, the aesthetics of that. And that's kind of his personal restriction, but he builds a lot of cubes and he's enjoying it. How about yourself? What do you think, May?
I'm personally a big fan of set cubes. I don't have any set cubes, like on hand or anything, but playing those set cubes feels really good because the more that you play it and the more that you understand the mechanics of that environment or that time frame, the easier it is going back to it, and it adds that kind of replayability factor that I really like because it lets you really digest and dissect that metagame. Like, if I wanted to make a set cube, I would do it for Aether Revolt and Kaladesh of all things, because I think that environment's cool. And I think that's what those types of set cubes really do a good job of breeding that creativity of taking a set or a block or just, let's say, a plane specific thing where it's like, well, this is a mechanic that came back in a different set, but it's still the same plane. Then I think that those are really cool restrictions that can create a more interesting and digestible metagame because it's familiar.
Yeah. So the next one we have, and I thank you, Steven, good friend of the show, by the way. He actually referenced our metal episode, and if anybody listens, you'll get to hear him do his throat roar. It was fantastic. And he's
some Mongolian throat singing, or
he actually hit a little bit of Metallica. Please listen to the metal episode with Steven. It was sick. So May, I'll pick up the next one, then we'll kind of do the volley back and forth.
For it.
The next one was, how do you do, fellow cubers? It was at the Cube Miser. And his only rule is, in my Legacy Plus cube, no mana rocks that can pay for themselves or better. So no Soul Ring, no Mana Vault, no Mana Crypt, no accelerators like Lotus Petal. Anything that's net positive, in so many words, didn't want to get it out of it.
Right.
And then he also said he liked cutting cards based on fun. This is interesting, right? Fun. And the definition of fun we talked about is very, everybody's fun's different. You talk to me, you got one version of fun.
It's a very subjective thing.
I was talking to my good friend Kevin last night, and his fun will not match your and I's fun, I assure you. He was a legacy grinder. But Jace, the Mind Sculptor, Mind Twist, a couple others, basically says get it out of here, but no hard and fast rules otherwise. So just basically wanted to keep his restriction is actually probably the most healthy one so far. Just he wants the play experience to represent fun. That's a good one, right? That's a good restriction.
I think that it is such a soft restriction that the amount of, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it. If we were to think of this like a grid, if there's like the fun to restrictive on one axis versus the restrictiveness to creativity on another axis, right? I believe that such a rule such as this is so soft that it could breed a lot of fun, it could breed a lot of creativity because it's so open, but it's also so open that it can be applied to a lot of cubes.
Yeah, it's kind of like D. Gallon has that kind of find the fun, right? That's the That's the restriction without being a restriction. Is just finding
follow the fun.
Find cards that are actually making your play group enjoy themselves, and I can respect that 100%. The next one, would you mind taking this one? This one's really cool, and I think you'll like this one, May.
This one's from Marshall Shaney at NG Shaney. And if a mechanic comes in and it has come in at least 2 cards, though I will sometimes cut down to 1 later, I will not include a 4/5 of a cycle if I don't want all 5. Then I cap myself at 3.
So they're trying to make sure that their mechanics are represented in so many words. There's enough density.
Right.
I think that's what I'm gathering out of that. And Marshall, if we're misstating that, please let us know on Discord or Twitter. But I think you're saying that a mechanic must be represented enough to actually make it playable in so many words before you'll introduce.
Which I can agree with that. I'm in a similar boat where I don't like having a bunch of random one-off mechanics. If I'm going to include adventure, I want just a bunch of adventure cards. That way I just explain that mechanic once, people understand the mechanic, and we're now all able to evaluate based off of our understanding of that mechanic, as opposed to throwing in, say, 1 mutate card, 1 bestow card, 1 other miscellaneous mechanics here. And I think that that's a good restriction. I also appreciate the not including a cycle unless it's a full one, because as a player, you're not going to really notice if a cycle is not complete or not, but as a curator, it's a form of expression of being like, I want to include the full cycle, and I'm not going to include a cycle of cards if I'm not going to, if I only want to play like 4/5 of those. So let's say the Gear Hulks, for example, since I'm on the Kaladesh mindset for the moment. I only wanted to play the Torrential Gear Hulk maybe Noxious Gear Hulk,
Verderis.
and then the whatever the red one was called.
Oh, the red one, I can't remember. That was amazing. I love the Gear Hulks, I just do. But
I love them too.
For very specific reasons.
But it makes sense as a curator to be like, I want to be able to run the entire cycle of it, even though it has pretty much minimal impact to the actual draft or the deck building to it. It is a nice restriction that adds that sort of expression or interest for the curator, and I think that that's really expressive and good. Granted, I think that it can paint yourself into a corner a little bit, because there are some cards that are part of a cycle that maybe the rest of the cycle aren't very good.
I would agree. All right, the next one we have is, it's an interesting one. It's and this kind of sums up what we're kind of talking about. The very beginning, we said there were some very prevalent ones, right? Some of the prevalent ones were like rarity restriction, protections, etc. But TGMP at TGMP numbers from Twitter, Commander Cube exclusion rules. Now, this is how they exclude: no infinite combos, specific color protection, non-land tutors, life gain themes, stacks. I don't know how I feel about that, TGMP. I love me some stacks. And then foreign language cards. And he said, does this count? It absolutely counts, right? This kind of comes back to that legibility during the draft. A lot of people aren't super high, except for J-Bro on the life gain, and me, and Stu, and May. But life gain themes.
You can't cut off the best part of this tweet,
It
though.
is the best.
The soft rule of,
oh, I know.
I can use the soft rule of, I ain't reading that meme to describe the card. It's out.
Exactly.
I ain't reading all that. Good for you, or I'm sorry that happened, or whatever.
That was a fantastic conclusion. Thank you, TGMP, and everybody else so far. The next one, would you mind taking on this one here? This is from Dave Thompson. It's a little short and sweet, but then you can pick up the next one, too. You can try to pronounce the one after.
Sure. You got it. This one's very simple. No protection from colors, and it means none of the swords. And I think that it leans into what we mentioned earlier. With a lot of the protection cards, hexproof, shroud, whatever, cards that restrict creativity or act as a sort of instant win con against a certain matchup, they aren't very fun. They don't create a very fun environment, and I think that that's a really good reason to restrict that.
I 100% agree. Like, so protection comes at a cost, right?
Right.
If you limit it, it can be, the games have to end. You can have small doses, like Mother of Runes, etc. Or just OG Mom. But you have to be kind of mindful of that, quote unquote, protections, right? We go back to my original, and we talked about this in one of our first episodes with Chris Moore when we were online about popper cubes, which I do recommend referencing that episode. Is my first just dumpster fire amalgamation of cube was actually a popper cube where I put circle protections in there. And not only they didn't do anything, they made the game even more boring because you give yourself protection from the card that actually attacked you. You shut down that goblin that I spent the time to put there anyways with circle of protection red. So protections just innately, you got to be really mindful with those and balancing them. I do think that there's a healthy dose that you can do. You just have to be really careful with it in so many words.
I was saying that I think it's important to note that there are cards like True Name Nemesis that solely exist as a win con of, aha, my True Name Nemesis has stuck on the board. You literally cannot interact with it. I'm just going to keep hitting you until I win. So unless you can outdamage me, this game's mine. Those cards aren't fun. And one that's gotten really popular in Cube, of all things, has been Knight of the Kitchen Sink, where it's just protection from all black bordered.
True.
Very, very strong card. Very good in powered environments. And while I can understand why on paper that sounds like it's... So what?
It's an uncard, correct?
Yeah, it's an uncard.
Yeah, that's a restriction all by itself because I won't run those, right? I don't mean to interrupt you, but that's a personal restriction. I will not invite those into my environments. That being said, my Monopoly Cube, I put go to jail. And now I've interrupted in this interruption. Carry on, Keebler. Sorry.
I was just finishing my thought of, it's a card that's gotten popular in Cube, and I just don't think that it has a place in Cube because it innately restricts fun unless you have enough uncards in your stuff.
Right.
And like you said, if you're running a restriction on uncards, then I just don't think it belongs in a lot of environments because it innately restricts fun. So when you're looking at no protection from certain colors as, hi, I see you're playing green. Well, I have protection from green. Get bent.
Right.
It's not a very fun interaction.
I would agree with that 100%. Protection again, back to it. Thanks, Dave Thompson, for contributing. It has its place, right? But you have to be really mindful of it. Like
Which
I do run a certain amount in my powered vintage environment. Those games, you know what? I think I've lost a little bit of fun in that one, and we've kind of talked about that before. Where the fun gets lost in the MTGO because you're putting the most powerful cards in there. Sometimes, like that, it's easy to get lost in that network of this card is super strong and it should belong here, but then forgetting that your audience actually wants to have a good time. So yeah, I 100% respect that. That's why I actually limit the swords. I run like Sword of Feast and Famine and Sword of Fire of Ice. But I've personally moved away from the swords for that reason. Not only were they a little clunky and a little costly, and people may disagree with this, just costs a lot. Even though Stoneforge Mystic doesn't exist in that environment, it just got replaced by colorless equipment spells that just did more, right? So I can see that. No protection from a color. Good choice, Dave. I do appreciate that one. This next one, would you mind taking this on May? Because I want you to try this name out because I'm going to butcher this.
Yeah, of course you want to tackle the names on me.
I'll take all the easy names.
Menno and Thunis.
Yep.
Close enough.
Try it. You get it.
Forgive me.
Thank you.
Forgive me, I'm trying my best. Please understand. The only rule that I have is that it should be fun to play. Since I generally play my cube with the same group of cards and themes that are mostly picked by me, if the group does give feedback, especially when a couple cards feels out of place. And I think that this is good. I think that it ties into what we've been harping on with the protections, hexproof shroud, etc. is things should be fun to play, and having that as a restriction tends to breed better environments.
It also ties into what we talked about with the feedback, right? I mean, Minno, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, 100% embrace that idea of feedback within your group, right? If the card feels out of place, get it out of here, right? So, be willing to try things, experiment. Experimenting's fine. You're not going to get it right every time. That's perfectly acceptable. We know that, so that's not necessarily a restriction, but I do like the fact that this person is actually 100% open to the idea of their play group going, this doesn't feel right. This feels, not appropriate for this location. So I get that. My next one here, I'll take the short and sweet ones. I'll take the next two, actually, because this first one's just funny.
Gotta take the easy ones.
Yeah, of course.
I see you.
My good friend of the show, Neheb the Great-Hearted, because I like this one. This one's straight up, no riffle shuffling. That's it. Just laughed a lot. That goes back to our Cube Courtesy episode. What I love about this, this showcases a lot of our shows that we talked about, but just please don't riffle shuffle. I mean, that's all he's asking. That's not really a restriction so much as just don't break my stuff, please.
Yep. Like, I will not riffle shuffle anybody else's cards, but for my cards, I don't care. Riffle shuffle them all you want. Go for it.
We talked about this. So the next one. So Wayne the Tired Program in the Goat Cube, Grizzlebrand and Archon are out because I don't want turn 2 remove or die reanimator decks, which I appreciate that, right? Like, I had to be mindful of that.
I think that's good.
My Horror Cube recently had to cut reanimate because I had the Exhume reanimate combo and people were hitting Grave Titan so fast. That was actually a complaint. I was at SEG Con in Richmond. No, SEG Con Charlotte, where I played with some of the Star City guys, and that was one of their open complaints is this was just too fast. Like, people are getting Grave Titan out on turn 2. This cube can't deal with this. So I can respect that. So it has its place. This next one is pretty straightforward. Oko is out because it defeats the point of elk everything.
I see you have Thing. No, it's an elk.
And then this one here, Wayne, I'm not sure. Get Probe and the Baubles are out because they reduce deck sizes for free and all the fast mana is out due for balance. That goes back to that tempo conversation I've been looking at all the time where you're kind of using that Xerox effect that Lunky Paper Radio talked about recently. I'm a huge fan of the Get Probes and the thinning of the deck to hit the targets, but I guess that's not what you want to see in your environment. That makes total sense to me. This next one's by one of the best listeners of the show. May, would you mind taking this one on, please?
Dan Serwin?
No, it's from UberCube.
All right. Huh. Gee, I wonder why this is the best listener. From UberCube, at UberCubeMTGPod. If you're making me do the bit, I'm making you suffer for making me do the bit.
This is devout listener.
Aside from powered, I've nerfed Reanimator. My horror recently was flattened into a more interactive Reanimator.
That kind of goes back to the Grave Titan thing I was just kind of rapping about. But that was
Right.
based on that. I had players better than me going, dude, turn to Grave Titan, not healthy for this environment. So I got the feedback. I listened. So I chose to flatten it out a little bit. I made it so that now you have to get something like Dance of the Dead or whatever. You have to bring it back turn 2 or greater. So it slows you down to turn 3, which is probably not ideal, but I wanted to still feel competitive, not completely flatline. But that was the gist. And thank you, UberCube, for reaching out. That was a really great response. Yeah.
Thanks, Supercube. I wonder who you are.
The next one was Dan Serwin at Champ Blankman. Both of my cubes are totally singleton 4-1, so they're singleton restricted, but because there's kind of this movement in the cube community, and I get it, of like making multiple lands, multiple fetches, multiple shocks. I get it. It's for the density, but I do respect. I'm a total singleton person too, with the exception of my Monopoly cube. I uncomfortably broke that, by the way, for my desert cube because it is what it is. But my old frame cube is restricted to old frame cards only. No power, no duels. My powered cube has no restrictions other than singleton and no storm or storm enablers. We talked about this during our storm episode. I love storm. I put it in my cube. I actually have a storm package sitting in my, like a micro storm cube storm package that I have designed in a folder. But storm, I tried it over and over again. I'm at 540 and it just fell apart. People fell on their faces so much. People love storm. They love it. People who hate storm, they hate. It's just not interactive for various reasons. I get it. I think Storm's technical.
Excuse you. Sorry.
Hello, Princess. I think Storm is highly technical, but I can see no Storm being it's kind of become a common thread too. This next one, actually, this is from a good friend of ours who's recently joined our play group. Would you mind taking this one on, please? This is from Light A5.
William Wilden at lights_A5 said, no dual face cards. 2, must look like a magic card.
Yeah. So I'm assuming.
Yes, as if that's as if that hasn't already been thrown out the window thanks to secret layers and whatnot. And must be legible for an English speaker. And I think these are all really clean, very good restrictions for your environment. Because while I adore a lot of the secret layers, there's a lot of them where it's just like, this doesn't feel like a magic card. Like, especially with like the serial ones or the ones from the Innistrad where they kind of looked like they were those posters for old horror movies.
Oh yeah,
love those.
Yeah,
Say what?
I run them personally in my horror cube.
Exactly,
fantastic. Like,
love them.
That dismember is disturbing, but
it doesn't mean that it fits the aesthetic for every environment.
And
it doesn't feel like a magic card.
Exactly. In Light A5 or William Wilden's defense, good friend of the show here, is I run that dismember, and numerous times now in my group, and it may happen at CubeCon, and I apologize in advance, where people can't understand what the mana cost is because it's weirdly placed on that card, right? Mm-hmm. And I wanted it for the thematic purposes, but I can see where maybe I've created in that restriction of I wanted that art so tight that maybe I've made it not legible, which leads to the next one, must be legible for an English speaker, because that's what William speaks in this case. And I understand that, and it makes it hard with your play group, having to ask, because I've had it passed around and go, hey, what is the mana cost of this? I'm like, it's Phyrexian, whatever. But it doesn't really make the card better because they can't read it. I get it. I respect that. Thank you, Light A5, good friend of the show. The next one is from the Commander Tavern. Other cards already in it. I avoid buying cards over $5. They have a dollar amount restriction, right? If I crack it in a pack or trade for it, fine, but no heavy investing. So they're doing budgetary restriction. I do like that. Kind of goes back to
a very real restriction for a lot of people. And
when
it comes to cubes and how often, like, I edit my cubes, for example, having a budgetary restriction is a really good way of holding yourself accountable for cards that people actually want to play, but without putting yourself out. Because when you start buying into a lot of these expensive cards and whatever, it's now heartbreaking when you take out those cards because you put money into this, you put time into this, and now suddenly you have that more attachment to it as well. And now that you have to cut it out because it's either too strong, too weak, whatever, then it becomes more of that heartbreaking moment of, all right, I took it out, now I have to buy something else to replace that slot with, and that can be expensive for a lot of people.
And
so
I
having
agree.
a budgetary restriction is very real.
And I respect that because I have experienced this myself in my Powered Vintage Cube. I wanted to keep up with the Joneses, right? And I waited for almost 2 years in the case, and I eventually, at the time, broke down and bought the Judge promo for land tax, which is no longer in there. But at the time, I was like, oh my God, that card's like 110, 120 bucks. I'm going to buy it for a birthday gift someday, right? And then I broke down and I went there and I'm like, give me that. I need it. I've earned this. It's my birthday like 3 years later. And I picked it up, and then they immediately reprinted it with the same art like 3 months later. And it was worth nothing to me anymore. I'm like, this one's really pretty, but they just printed it for like, I don't know, a quarter of the price. So yeah, I feel the heartstrings of overly investing in cards because of the art and because of the cost. It is a guilty pleasure that sometimes bites you, right? With reprints have it's a double-edged sword for a cube curator. You're like super excited because you're going to add in that new copy of that foiled opposition that was 7th edition or whatever at the time, and then they reprint it, and then you're like, oh, man, I just paid like a stupid amount of money for this card, and they made it way cheaper, the same art, which I do appreciate, but it does hurt my personal heartstrings a little bit because I just spent a lot of money on a card for basically the same card. The next one is from our good friend Chris Moore at Sandwich MTPG. I don't like this guy very much, Chris Moore. He's no, I'm just kidding. Chris Moore is wonderful. This is one of my best friends in the whole wide world. And for his shard cubes, no walkers or tutors with a flatter power level makes games more interesting and even. What do you think about that, May?
So I actually can kind of understand why they're saying it makes their power level flatter, but I think that it is very context dependent, and that type of restriction might be good for their environments, but for mine, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So, like, my Fake Cube runs a ton of tutors, like a lot of tutors, but that's because there's a lot of decks that rely on one or two cards and being able to tutor out those cards and toolbox into what you need to be able to make the environment interesting and engaging. The power level of the Fake Cube is so low that whatever you're tutoring isn't really going to be swinging the game in a huge degree compared to whatever your opponent's going to tutor. As opposed to, say, no walkers, where planeswalkers can either be this very impactful clock that can end a game or can generate so much value that it's hard to compete with, like Oko. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have things like Tybalt.
Bless Tybalt. He tried so hard. He tried so hard to be so good.
He tried so hard to be so good. Where in a lot of environments, Tybalt's just not going to be doing a lot. So it's hard for me to say, oh no, you should never ever put Tybalt in your environment because all planeswalkers are too good.
Tybalt fans, hold out. He'll come back someday. He will. He's going to find a place. If you got a Tybalt cube...
And to the other extent of, nope, no tutors because all tutors are just innately unfun or unfair or too consistent. And, obviously different goals for different curators, and what their environment looks like is much different from what my environment looks like. So I think that restriction is pretty interesting.
Yeah, Chris Moore is, as I said, he's my cube and life coach, so he helps check me. And I've actually removed tutors from my horror cube and artifact cube. Now saying that, the artifact cube does have tutor-esque cards where they look for very specific cards. Like we talked about recently with I think it was the Scrapyard Recombiner, where it searches out and fetches constructs exclusively. So it's a tutor, but it's a very restrictive tutor in this sense, right? I want to have that advanced gameplay, but not that replacement effect in your deck, where a tutor might represent any card of your 40, etc. Whereas a very restrictive tutor that's very specific can be interesting, like Scrapyard Recombiner, but it only looks for certain cards. And that's something he and I talked about to make the artifact, Uberbear's artifact cube, more interesting, but not... So I kind of walk that same path as Chris does, well, mostly because he tells me to. But another one he has, and these are glorious, and Pauper and the Peasant Cubes. In this case, his Peasant Cube is going to be featured at CubeCon 2023. Congratulations, Chris Moore, by the way, for getting voted for a main event cube. But he's got the obvious rarity restrictions, right? I mean, it's kind of the no-brainer. But the one thing we talked about this in a previous episode, is no Monarch, no buyback, or Dungeons Initiative mechanics. And so, and then he says power anything goes, right? But
Mm-hmm.
in the low powered environments, the paupers and the peasants, we talked about this before, the monarch just creates too much of an advantage in his environments. Buyback gets too repetitive, it's too much value add. Stuff like capsize can get just out of
Mm-hmm.
control. And then I just have personal feelings towards dungeons and initiatives because we'll
Mm.
talk about this in a new episode coming out soon about sub games that we're writing. But it's too much mental tasking for me personally. So Chris and I are on the same page with this one, as you might imagine. Would you mind taking on this next one because the name is fun?
Every time,
Yes.
without fail.
On the purpose.
This one's from @EmperorCoder, Yannick Laturno, and one, reading the card explains the card. No significant errata or oracle text needed. That one I just really love. I'm just putting a pin in that one because I want to come back to it. 2, cards must have been in standard at some point. No card that wins the game on its own. Removal must be splashable. Means no double pip mana cost. And 3, no 3-color casting costs. And 6 is peasant rarity.
Interesting. So they avoid pips, right? They want things to be castable and playable. I do like that. What was your comeback on these conversations? You wanted to talk about reading the card explains.
Yes, the one I wanted to come back was the number 1 there of no significant errata oracle text. There have been so many wizards, rogues, whatever, that I've had to not put in my Fey Cube. Or more importantly, it's several humans that I wanted to put in my Fey Cube that I didn't because they aren't listed as humans, as warriors, as rogues, etc. Because I want people to be able to look at the physical card, read the card, and have it and know exactly what it does. I want people to know what it does as printed, and I think that is just a good cube design because it makes the gameplay is as expected. You get what you see on the box. There is no sudden gotcha of, oh, that's a human, by the way, or, oh, this actually does another thing, by the way.
I agree with that 100%. Kind of back to what we talked about before. Oh, the Oracle text. That's what I want to get on. So my Discord recently, they mentioned, hey, Anthony, you got to do a better job of reading the Oracle text. And my problem is a lot of times I pull these from the cubes and I read them directly as printed on the cubes. And so I find myself in that trap and I can't seem to get out of it. I'll get better eventually, but that's a lot of maximum effort, but I want to do it. And another one too is that I want to be very mindful of, we talked about this in our, back to the cards must explain the card, or the trap of not having cards that seek out the cards. I didn't know that Triskelion was a construct, right? Until I had an aha moment in our last episode where we talked about Scrapyard Recombiner. And I went through all of CubeCon Part 1, and people may not have realized that Scrapyard Recombiner could actually fetch Triskelion, because I had the old original version of Triskelion that just called
Which I wouldn't have known.
Me either, until I tripped across it and I started doing a Scryfall search, and then I came across it and like, oh my gosh, this is... So I've now replaced that art, which pained me because I love that old robot, like that goofy looking Will Robinson robot, danger, danger, danger. But now I've put in the new modern version that says construct on it, so you know that your Scrapyard Recombiner in that cube environment can go seek out this card. Yeah. So I the old Triskelions now become like a wedge for my lands, so you can flip it over and go, yeah, that's what it's supposed to say.
The other one that I wanted to highlight here, if that's okay.
Yeah, do it.
Is I find it particularly interesting of no card that wins the game on its own. I find that particularly interesting as a restriction because there's a lot of limited environments where your bomby important cards are the ones that swing the game into your favor. For example, in the Fate Cube Great Oak Guardian. It comes in, makes all of your things stupid big, it closes the game. And sometimes having your big stupid things that close the game is what you need in order to get the game over with. And having that as a restriction says a lot about the environment with just such a short rule of cards aren't going to be winning the games on their own. There isn't going to be some hoof variant that comes down and just wins the game if it's not answered. And I think that is a particularly good thing for what their goals are, and being able to translate that with such a simple rule can give you an idea of what you're looking for in a draft of, I might want to prefer some value-centric cards or some cards like Ravenous Chupacabra, a classic cube card. I might want to prefer it just because that's a value card. And when we're not expecting big, stupid cards that just end the game on their own, I know that I can just start drafting for value ahead of time, and I think that's particularly interesting.
I would agree with that 100%. I think that's really neat restrictions, and they're not pinning themselves into a corner, as we talked about. These are just really cool, significant restrictions.
It increases the creativity, which is why I like it.
This next one, this username is fantastic. The Family Disappointment. At Strawberry, with STRBRY Wonder, Strawberry Wonder. No mill, and you're my spirit animal now there, Strawberry. No mill unless you state before you play mill. You have to... Everyone has to have a
Everyone
counter
has
mill.
a counter mill because it's the dumbest mechanic.
Yeah, everyone has to have a counter mill because it's the dumbest mechanic. I think Justin Parnell would truly appreciate this statement. You can play Eldrazi, but you don't use the Annihilate ability after you cast them.
I feel targeted with this one.
This is fantastic.
As somebody who supports mill in my environment.
This is fantastic. You know what? Thank you, Family Disappointment. I truly appreciate what you just did to me. That's glorious. Absolutely glorious. I hope you're listening.
Well, darn. I guess I'm not part of the show anymore. I play mill.
You did it. Got her. The next one here. Would you mind taking? I'll give you a clean one here. Would you mind taking on this next one, please? This is fun. I'm enjoying this very much. These restrictions are so neat, and I like that the community has given such wonderful feedback. And it kind of coalesces into what we talked about in the beginning, back to the original question that I put out there. What are your rules? What are your restrictions? What goes in your cube? What's not allowed in your cube? This is fantastic. Thank you so much for the community to giving these amazing responses. Would you mind taking this next one, please?
The next one's from 41 Savage at Carbine_Leguzio. And blue does not get access to hate. Blue does not get access to Monarch, and monocolor aggro gets access to both.
Oh, I
find that interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. The Monarch one, I can't think of the name of the card, but it's like this interesting looking, what do you call it? Like it's the Shackles looking card.
Fall from Favor?
It was a common. Was it Fall from Favor? The common
Fall
card.
Fall from Favor is the enchantment that looks like a shackle
that's
thing,
exactly what I'm referring to.
Tap something down, as long as you have Monarch, it can't untap.
Yeah. Our good friend Samich actually tested out. I believe that's common, right? It's common.
Yep,
he tested it out in his Pauper Cube, and it was broken. It's whenever we started doing the restrictions on Monarch, both in his version and the version that I gave to my little brother. We kind of gave a Monarch package, because I do like Monarch as a mechanic. I think it's neat, but in a Pauper environment, it kind of got unruly. And we just gave blue more of the thing it does so well, is draw cards, right? So I can totally get down with this. 41 Savage, this is fantastic. And he says no Fury.
I think it's always... Sorry.
I want to know about this no Fury thing, like the Dislike a Fury. Isn't that the one that you can cast for free? It's the mono red spell. I think ChillMTG loves this card so much. I want to know more about that. I'd love to get your feedback, 41 Savage, on the no Fury. It's just no Fury, period. Like, very direct. What did Fury do to you? I want to know what happened here. So I'm interested. I'm interested to hear more about this. The next one's from Ricky Lynn at Also Steve. Simple. All cards must be multicolor or require more than one color to get full use of the color. So we have kind of
that.
It's the opposing idea, right? That we talked about before with the pips. We had the one individual that's like, I don't like pips. And then we got this one here that's like, give me the pips. I want
all of them. Throw them all on.
I want a full
more
spectrum cube. This next one we're going to edit out for the show. Would you mind taking us this one? Because you can definitely see there's a F word there, and we're PG-13 at best.
Hicks, F your notions at Dice Knife Ethics says instant speed removal must be conditional and have significant costs, so auras and tricks can thrive. I really like this because it is an approach that I took for my Fake Cube for a while. Of all the good removal is either really expensive, where it's like murder type cards. Because in my environment, a 3-mana removal spell is fine. It's going to be perfectly fine. But having a sorcery speed that's cheaper can be a lot more fair, because it can allow cards that pass the Vindicate test to just really thrive.
What do you think about the life investment from a lot of black cards that are instant? Do you consider that an additional cost when you pay, like, for instance, 2 life?
I think it's fine.
Life? I think it's fine. I think life is a resource, but I can see that maybe the black player that's going super
I think
sacrifice.
My opinion is sometimes it might be a little too lenient.
Yeah, sometimes 2 life. Maybe it should be like 5 life. But
Right, so you know that 1/2 mana black instant speed removal where it's just destroy target creature, lose 2 life?
that's exactly what I'm thinking of, and the name eludes
Yep.
me. But I'll have to
Edit
yeah.
in later.
Yeah, I'll add, maybe I'll add it in later, but it doesn't really matter.
2 life's not enough for that. It's
not
not enough.
It-
It
it's-
should be
it-
3
it's-
life.
it's
Bolt
not
yourself.
It should be 3 life. It's not a real cost, right? I mean, it's kind of not.
Right.
I mean, yeah, like
2 life, okay, whatever, I just shocked myself. This is the equivalent of playing a land.
yeah. So is
3
it really,
life suddenly it's like, ooh, do I want to take a bolt to the face in order
No.
to just remove this creature?
But yes, I will. Do not take 5. I'll take 3. But it does create that tension during the gameplay, which I do
Right.
like, the increased life total. So yeah, I 100% agree with that statement. This next one, would you mind taking this one? It's really cool.
From Thomas Gunn with 2 N's. At Thomas Does a Lot. Since red is bad at dealing with indestructible and regular enchantments, non-saga, aura, etc., my red cube follows the rules with 2 exceptions. Hazard, Sulfuric Vortex are the exceptions. Both are iconic to red's history and felt like a good thematic expressions. What was the rule here? Hang on.
Just really avoids, what I get is really red wants to make sure that red is strong enough not to deal with. They don't want to oversaturate enchantments so that red.
I think the rule is that they don't use indestructible or just normal enchantments, with the exception of Hazard and Sulfuric Vortex.
But they will let
I
auras.
think that's what they're
looks
saying.
like they'll let auras survive because red can kind of deal
Yeah.
with sweep the legs out underneath the creature before it hits. I do like that. I'm actually designing a mono red cube. It's in progress. I will talk about it in future episodes. It's going to be the Bolt the Bird cube. So everything has a 3 toughness, and I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm trying to design a 360 cube. Theory crafting it right now as we speak. May and I and Stu will talk about this in a later episode, but the gist is that I will allow no enchantments into the field because, as Thomas Gunn has mentioned, red simply can't deal with it, but I will allow auras like fire breathing and stuff like that to go onto these cards because you can sweep the legs. You can kick the chair legs out underneath the creature. That's kind of cool, right? And I'm making it so they're vulnerable to bolt and below. So I'm working on this idea. It's in progress, theory crafting. But I really appreciate this because I am a red mage at heart. The next one
same.
Oh, yeah. The next one is Zach Barrison. They, Legend the Nail. Yeah, I think I got that right. Mine is a commander cube, and my rule is no cards that combo with the commander. Interesting. I like that. So the commanders are pseudo nerfed. Is what I'm getting out of that. Does that sound like what coming out of that so many words, May?
Yeah, I think that's just the gist of it, is where we're not having these combo commanders like Kiki Jiki. Just as the most common example.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I appreciate that, Zach. That is amazing. I love that.
It's very clean, very simple. Of if you're drafting it and you're expecting to get another combo piece with your commander, that's not what's happening here.
Zach, I would
and
love
having
to hear
that as
more
that
from you on
preemptive
that one
discussion is
because
good.
what I want to ask to Zach, and I'm curious if Zach's a listener, but I would love to hear this one, is whether or not he's using the commanders to prop up mostly the colors that you design within your commander cube, and that they have ancillary effects, secondary effects, right? But they're not the linchpin of the design whenever you grab them. I think that's what I'm interpreting here, but we'll find out, I guess. The next one, would you mind taking on the last one, May? This is pretty great.
Ban Solitude in Modern. At
Yeah!
Ban Solitude.
Just came out the gate, right? It's pretty great.
No evoke elementals, no force of vigors, no force of wills, no ephemerates. And then I wonder if they have a problem with Solitude.
And then they put day 251 of demanding WotC to ban Solitude in Modern. Oh my gosh, fantastic. Thank you. And I gotta ask, what are your feelings?
Committed to the bit.
And then ban Solitude, if you're a listener, I gotta know what your feelings on Fury is, because we had a listener up above talk about Fury. This is glorious. I love that. This has been fun.
Man, some people have some feelings about these cards.
Yeah, I need to know more.
I think it's totally fine just having a strict restriction of, I don't like playing with them, I don't want to see them, get that garbage away from me, I don't want to play them, I don't care how my players feel, get it away from me. I think it's totally fine.
In a nutshell,
it's your environment.
This person doesn't like free spells and the ability to blink at fast rate, blink spells that were, spells that have ETBs that are free, and they have a strong distaste for them. That's fantastic.
Strong enough that it's their entire shtick.
Made, I promise you this would be a fun episode. This has been a full community immersion episode about all the really cool things. Back to that original Willy Wonka, back to the Willy Wonka. I'm sorry, rules of the house. That was fantastic. So as curators, we find ourselves kind of governing. We're firmware creators, right? And then the players are using the firmware that we've put in, we hard coded into the cube environment, as we said, our original analogy. But then, as the players, we've given you software that we're allowed rules or parameters that you're allowed to exercise or play within said bandwidth that we've allowed you. But at what point are we so restrictive on ourselves that we inhibit our creativity, where we're using that Morrow's axiom that we talked about, where restriction breeds creativity, but then we turn it on its head, right? We have this tendency to overly restrict ourselves that maybe the restriction just breeds more restriction, as we've seen in some of the original cases that we talked about in the very beginning of this episode. Back to our good friend Nathan, who's a new curator, and then our good friend Christian of the show, who made the Bant Enchantments Cube, that says, thou shalt not enter my enchantment cube unless you are yourself an enchantment. I can see where maybe it can potentially paint yourself in the corner. So, May, we talked about it kind of as a wrap up. Your thoughts were numerically to kind of stay within your bandwidth of thematic design. What was your percentage, once again, for the audience that you felt was comfortable?
Well, for my environment, I think generally that there isn't a correct percentage or anything, but for my environment, I stick around 85 to 90% because I want it to be identifiable. And to follow up with what you were saying earlier, the things about creating restrictions to begin with is that it can be an identifier for what your cube does, what your cube represents, and having those things breeds the creativity of your environment. It is the identity of your cube, etc. And the more that you're willing to challenge that could loosen it up those reins, or you could lose your identity in the process. And whether or not that's something that you need to think about is on the creator themselves. And I think that being able to discuss something like this is a good and healthy thing.
I 100% agree with those statements. So this has been a fun episode. I want to say a special thank you to all of the contributors. I hope that you guys get to hear this as we did some very unique shout outs. This was fun. For those that we may have botched your names, I truly apologize. We tried our best. If you noticed, I definitely
forgive me. I'm cute.
I queued May up. I 100% teed May up to I can't pronounce this. I'm not going to try. So May, thank you for making maximum effort with some of these names. But
I tried. Forgive me for my effort.
May, did you have fun?
It was a lot of fun.
I thought this was a thought-provoking, interesting thing, that what goes in behind the scenes as a curator, where we're designing. I guess you have to think more of, from designers, you think of more game design rules versus gameplay rules, right? It's a different way of thinking. This is what curators are doing. So when people are challenging the context of your cube environment, and what are your restrictions, and we can get a little defensive. I get defensive. I'm sure May does too. Like somebody come.
We're passionate.
We're passionate little critters, right? It's a come at you. But you know what? We kind of going back, referencing that feedback that May and I talked about in multiple episodes. It's also healthy to listen to your group to see if your restrictions are making your environment playable, and finding the fun. To reference our good friend Derek Gallen, is finding the fun is probably the most important thing in any cube design. May, what do you think about that?
I agree. I mean, my motto is follow the fun.
100%. So. All right, so we're going to move over to our socials. I hope everybody enjoyed this one. If you'd love the show, we would truly appreciate a 5-star review on your favorite player. That goes a long way to really promote the show. And not only that, but it also gets this thing that we all love so much, Cube in general, out to the community. We want to pull people into the fold. Also, UberCube is an Ultra Sleeves affiliate where you can use our code to get 5% off your purchase. You can go to ultrasleeves.com/UberCube. And I love Ultra Sleeves. I'm going to be pimping out my both my Artifact Cube and my Horror Cube for CubeCon 2023, which we're super excited about. We're Team UberCube, myself, Chris Moore, May, and Christian, and then maybe some others. We're still waiting on those people. My room's getting a little weird at this point, but yeah, we're going to work it out. And yeah, we're super excited and hype about CubeCon. It's going to be so much fun. And if you want to support,
it's going to be a fun time.
Oh my gosh, it's going to be exciting. If you want to support the show, please use our Inked Gaming affiliate link, where you can get playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, and custom and large volume products. I keep that in there because it makes me laugh every time. But Ink Gaming is pretty sweet. Actually, Bay, you and I need to have an open discussion, as well as Stu and the other group, about getting us. We got to rep that UberCube playmats when we go to CubeCon 2023, right? We got to drop them on the. We got to represent. And then you can also find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. Reach us at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. Link us on Discord, #UberCube. And then we have a Patreon. May, tell them about the Patreon.
Tell us about the Patreon.
Patreon.
I don't know anything about the Patreon.
No, nobody does. And other than that, we're gonna say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is
welcome to the rules. Wait, nope, that's not right. Welcome.
Restriction breeds create. Happy cubing.
Happy cubing.